the United States, I stand before you truly proud of what we have achieved together. We did what we came here to do, and so much more. This week, we inaugurate a new administration and pray for its success in keeping America safe and prosperous. We extend our best wishes, and we also want them to have luck, a very important word. I'd like to begin by thanking just a few of the amazing people who made our remarkable journey possible. First, let me express my overwhelming gratitude for the love and support of our spectacular First Lady, Melania. Let me also share my deepest appreciation to my daughter Ivanka, my son-in-law Jared, and to Barron, Don, Eric, Tiffany, and Lara. You fill my world with light and with joy. I also want to thank Vice President Mike Pence, his wonderful wife Karen, and the entire Pence family. Thank you as well to my Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, the dedicated members of the White House staff, and the cabinet, and all of the incredible people across our administration who poured out their heart and soul to fight for America. I also want to take a moment to thank a truly exceptional group of people. The United States Secret Service. My family and I will forever be in your debt. My profound gratitude as well to everyone in the White House Military Office, the teams of Marine One and Air Force One, every member of the armed forces, and state and local law enforcement all across our country. Most of all, I want to thank the American people. To serve as your president has been an honor beyond description. Thank you for this extraordinary privilege, and that's what it is, a great privilege and a great honor. We must never forget that while Americans will always have our disagreements, we are a nation of incredible, decent, faithful, and peace-loving citizens who all want our country to thrive and flourish and be very, very successful and good. We are a truly magnificent nation. All Americans were horrified by the assault on our Capitol. Political violence is an attack on everything we cherish as Americans. It can never be tolerated. Now more than ever, we must unify around our shared values and rise above the partisan rancor and forge our common destiny. 4 years ago, I came to Washington as the only true outsider ever to win the presidency. I had not spent my career as a politician, but as a builder looking at open skylines and imagining infinite possibilities. I ran for president because I knew there were towering new summits for America just waiting to be scaled. I knew the potential for our nation was boundless as long as we put America first. So I left behind my former life and stepped into a very difficult arena, but an arena nevertheless with all sorts of potential if properly done. America had given me so much, and I wanted to give something back. Together with millions of hardworking patriots across this land, we built the greatest political movement in the history of our country. We also built the greatest economy in the history of the world. It was about America first because we all wanted to make America great again. We restored the principle that a nation exists to serve its citizens. Our agenda was not about right or left. It wasn't about Republican or Democrat, but about the good of a nation, and that means the whole nation. With the support and prayers of the American people, we achieved more than anyone thought possible. Nobody thought we could even come close. We passed the largest package of tax cuts and reforms in American history. We slashed more job-killing regulations than any administration had ever done before. We fixed our broken trade deals, withdrew from the horrible Trans-Pacific Partnership and the impossible Paris Climate Accord, renegotiated the one-sided South Korea deal, and we replaced NAFTA with the groundbreaking USMCA. That's Mexico and Canada, a deal that's worked out very, very well. Also, and very importantly, we imposed historic and monumental tariffs on China, made a great new deal with China, But before the ink was even dry, we and the whole world got hit with the China virus. Our trade relationship was rapidly changing. Billions and billions of dollars were pouring into the U.S., but the virus forced us to go in a different direction. The whole world suffered, but America outperformed other countries economically because of our incredible economy and the economy that we built. Without the foundations and footings, it wouldn't have worked out this way. We wouldn't have some of the best numbers we've ever had. We also unlocked our energy resources and became the world's #1 producer of oil and natural gas by far. Powered by these policies, we built the greatest economy in the history of the world. We reignited America's job creation and achieved record low unemployment for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, women, almost everyone. Income soared, wages boomed, the American dream was restored, and millions were lifted from poverty in just a few short years. It was a miracle. Stock market set one record after another with 148 stock market highs during this short period of time and boosted the retirements and pensions of hardworking citizens all across our nation. 401ks are at a level they've never been at before. We've never seen numbers like we've seen, and that's before the pandemic and after the pandemic. We rebuilt the American manufacturing base, opened up thousands of new factories, and brought back the beautiful phrase, made in the USA. To make life better for working families, we doubled the child tax credit and signed the largest ever expansion of funding for child care and development. We joined with the private sector to secure commitments to train more than 16 million American workers for the jobs of tomorrow. When our nation was hit with the terrible pandemic, we produced not one, but 2 vaccines with record-breaking speed, and more will quickly follow. They said it couldn't be done, but we did it. They called it a medical miracle, and that's what they're calling it right now, a medical miracle. Another administration would have taken 3, 4, 5, maybe even up to 10 years to develop a vaccine. We did it in 9 months. We grieve for every life lost, and we pledge in their memory to wipe out this horrible pandemic once and for all. When the virus took its brutal toll on the world's economy, we launched the fastest economic recovery our country has ever seen. We passed nearly $4 trillion in economic relief, saved or supported over 50 million jobs, and slashed the unemployment rate in half. These are numbers that our country has never seen before. We created choice and transparency in healthcare, stood up to Big Pharma in so many ways, but especially in our effort to get favored nations clauses added, which will give us the lowest prescription drug prices anywhere in the world. We passed VA choice, VA accountability, right to try, and landmark criminal justice reform. We confirmed 3 new justices of the United States Supreme Court. We appointed nearly 300 federal judges to interpret our Constitution as written. For years, the American people pleaded with Washington to finally secure the nation's borders. I am pleased to say we answered that plea and achieved the most secure border in U.S. history. We have given our brave border agents and heroic ICE officers the tools they need to do their jobs better than they have ever done before, and to enforce our laws and keep America safe. We proudly leave the next administration with the strongest and most robust border security measures ever put into place. This includes historic agreements with Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, along with more than 450 miles of powerful new wall. We restored American strength at home and American leadership abroad. The world respects us again. Please don't lose that respect. We reclaimed our sovereignty by standing up for America at the United Nations and withdrawing from the one-sided global deals that never served our interest. And NATO countries are now paying hundreds of billions of dollars more than when I arrived just a few years ago. It was very unfair. We were paying the cost for the world. Now the world is helping us. And perhaps most importantly of all, with nearly $3 trillion, we fully rebuilt the American military, all made in the USA. We launched the first new branch of the United States Armed Forces in 75 years, the Space Force. And last spring, I stood at Kennedy Space Center in Florida and watched as American astronauts returned to space on American rockets for the first time in many, many years. We revitalized our alliances and rallied the nations of the world to stand up to China like never before. We obliterated the ISIS caliphate and ended the wretched life of its founder and leader, al-Baghdadi. We stood up to the oppressive Iranian regime and killed the world's top terrorist, Iranian butcher Qasem Soleimani. We recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. As a result of our bold diplomacy and principled realism, we achieved a series of historic peace deals in the Middle East. Nobody believed it could happen. The Abraham Accords opened the doors to a future of peace and harmony, not violence and bloodshed. It is the dawn of a new Middle East, and we are bringing our soldiers home. I am especially proud to be the first president in decades who has started no new wars. Above all, we have reasserted the sacred idea that in America, the government answers to the people. Our guiding light, our North Star, our unwavering conviction has been that we are here to serve the noble, everyday citizens of America. Our allegiance is not to the special interests, corporations, or global entities. It's to our children, our citizens, and to our nation itself. As president, my top priority, my constant concern, has always been the best interests of American workers and American families. I did not seek the easiest course. By far, it was actually the most difficult. I did not seek the path that would get the least criticism. I took on the tough battles, the hardest fights, the most difficult choices, because that's what you elected me to do. Your needs were my first and last unyielding focus. This, I hope, will be our greatest legacy. Together, we put the American people back in charge of our country. We restored self-government. We restored the idea that in America, no one is forgotten because everyone matters and everyone has a voice. We fought for the principle that every citizen is entitled to equal dignity, equal treatment, and equal rights, because we are all made equal by God. Everyone is entitled to be treated with respect, to have their voice heard, and to have their government listen. You are loyal to your country, and my administration was always loyal to you. We worked to build a country in which every citizen could find a great job and support their wonderful families. We fought for the communities where every American could be safe and schools where every child could learn. We promoted a culture where our laws would be upheld, our heroes honored, our history preserved, and law-abiding citizens are never taken for granted. Americans should take tremendous satisfaction in all that we have achieved together. It's incredible. Now, as I leave the White House, I have been reflecting on the dangers that threaten the priceless inheritance we all share. As the world's most powerful nation, America faces constant threats and challenges from abroad. But the greatest danger we face is a loss of confidence in ourselves, a loss of confidence in our national greatness. A nation is only as strong as its spirit. We are only as dynamic as our pride. We are only as vibrant as the faith that beats in the hearts of our people. No nation can long thrive that loses faith in its own values, history, and heroes. For these are the very sources of our unity and our vitality. What has always allowed America to prevail and triumph over the great challenges of the past has been an unyielding and unashamed conviction in the nobility of our country and its unique purpose in history. We must never lose this conviction. We must never forsake our belief in America. The key to national greatness lies in sustaining and instilling our shared national identity. That means focusing on what we have in common, the heritage that we all share. At the center of this heritage is also a robust belief in free expression, free speech, and open debate. Only if we forget who we are and how we got here could we ever allow political censorship and blacklisting to take place in America. It's not even thinkable. Shutting down free and open debate violates our core values and most enduring traditions. In America, we don't insist on absolute conformity or enforce rigid orthodoxies and punitive speech codes. We just don't do that. America is not a timid nation of tame souls who need to be sheltered and protected from those with whom we disagree. That's not who we are. It will never be who we are. For nearly 250 years, in the face of every challenge, Americans have always summoned our unmatched courage, confidence, and fierce independence. These are the miraculous traits that once led millions of everyday citizens to set out across a wild continent and carve out a new life in the Great West. It was the same profound love of our God-given freedom that willed our soldiers into battle and our astronauts into space. As I think back on the past 4 years, one image rises in my mind above all others. Whenever I traveled all along the motorcade route, there were thousands and thousands of people. They came out with their families so that they could stand as we passed and proudly wave our great American flag. It never failed to deeply move me. I knew that they did not just come out to show their support of me. They came out to show me their support and love for our country. This is a republic of proud citizens who are united by our common conviction that America is the greatest nation in all of history. We are and must always be a land of hope, of light, and of glory to all the world. This is the precious inheritance that we must safeguard at every single turn. For the past 4 years, I have worked to do just that. From a great hall of Muslim leaders in Riyadh to a great square of Polish people in Warsaw, from the floor of the Korean Assembly to the podium at the United Nations General Assembly, and from the Forbidden City in Beijing to the shadow of Mount Rushmore, I fought for you, I fought for your family, I fought for our country. Above all, I fought for America and all it stands for, and that is safe, strong, proud, and free. Now, as I prepare to hand power over to a new administration at noon on Wednesday, I want you to know that the movement we started is only just beginning. There's never been anything like it. The belief that a nation must serve its citizens will not dwindle, but instead only grow stronger by the day. As long as the American people hold in their hearts deep and devoted love of country, then there is nothing that this nation cannot achieve. Our communities will flourish, our people will be prosperous, our traditions will be cherished, our faith will be strong, and our future will be brighter than ever before. I go from this majestic place with a loyal and joyful heart, an optimistic spirit, and a supreme confidence that for our country and for our children, the best is yet to come. Thank you and farewell. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. My fellow Americans.
Well, there you have it. That was a farewell address from the president himself, posted to his White House YouTube account. We were happy to bring that to you, and we'll play it out a few more times as well. Pretty much the president just extending best wishes to that new administration, thanking his family, Vice President Mike Pence and his family, his Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, and other staffers at the White House as well. He talked about the nation, saying it's truly magnificent and that a political attack like January 6th can never be tolerated. He said that he came to Washington as only an outsider, and talked about all of his achievements that he has had over the past 4 years, including tax cuts, trade deals, NAFTA replacement, tariffs imposed on China, economic gains, and then also job creation. He touted vaccine development, saying that it was a medical miracle, Operation Warp Speed. He said that his top priority has been the best interest of American workers and families. He highlighted the fact that he's taken on quite a bit of criticism through his 4 years. But he said that the work isn't over. America faces threats from abroad, and he wants America to sustain its national identity. He did outline and say that this movement that he has started, it will not stop, but he is stepping away from office with a loyal and joyful heart and an optimistic spirit, and says that the best is yet to come. As President Trump released that message, and that was just probably 20-minute message, shorter than what we usually hear from the president himself, we had President-elect Joe Biden, who is going to be stepping into his seat, arriving at Joint Base Andrews. So we're going to play that out for you in its entirety, as he will be having an event in the next hour at Lincoln Memorial for a COVID-19 memorial service for those who have died due to the pandemic. So let's play this out for you. If you're new to us here on News Now from Fox, this is what we do. We take live, raw, and unfiltered feeds, and we show them to you in their entirety, and we're happy to do that for you right now. I'm just going to go ahead and put up the audio so we can listen in to Biden taking his steps into Washington, D.C. as he heads into the White House. As mentioned before, this was recorded just about 10 minutes ago. Today has been filled with events with President-elect Joe Biden, and also events talking about Biden's new picks, his hearings to confirm his cabinet. The first hearings started today, just one day before inauguration, January 20th. The action kicked off in the morning with the Senate Finance Committee hosting Treasury Secretary nominee Janet Yellen. The Senate Intelligence Committee held a hearing for Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines. And Homeland Security's Secretary nominee Alejandro Mayorkas appeared before the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. Before we brought you the address, the farewell address from President Trump, we were showing you the hearing for Biden's pick for Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. He had a hearing before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and still is at this moment. So we'll take you out to a couple of those hearings once this finishes out playing. And also going on right now is a hearing for Defense Secretary nominee Lloyd Austin in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee. On Thursday, there's going to be a hearing for Transportation Secretary nominee Pete Buttigieg before the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. We will be bringing you all of these live events here on News Now from Fox. As you can imagine, high security presence for Inauguration Day, and we've been doing interviews talking about that, preps in and around the Capitol, with National Guard members deployed to Washington, D.C. over the past week, and will likely stay for the days following inauguration as well. But you'll see in the shot momentarily the line of security officials that will wrap around all of Joint Base Andrews. Motorcade. And again, these are live, raw, and unfiltered feeds, so if the camera guy is moving around, he wants to get the best shot for us. But take a look at that. And this is obviously a recorded feed, but they're heading over to the Lincoln Memorial, and that's a nice live look at the Lincoln Memorial as we see it. An aerial view. We'll be bringing that to you in full as well. And tomorrow for Inauguration Day, we will be bringing you all of the festivities, a preview in the morning from our Orlando hub, and then straight into the beginning of the day with inaugural ceremonies, the pass and review, wreath laying at Arlington National Cemetery, the presidential escort and parade across America. And then last but not least, at the end of the evening will be the Celebrating America Primetime Special, which will carry live here on NewsNOW from Fox. A truly historic and unprecedented inauguration day, just like the entire year of 2020, going to be looking very different, but still a full schedule of festivities throughout the day with high police presence, high security. And again, hearings for new cabinet, all in the midst of it. So as I said, this motorcade is heading out to Lincoln Memorial, and once we get any ground shots of the memorial and that event starting to pick up, we will bring that to you here on NewsNOW. Until then, though, we're going to go back to the hearing for Biden's pick for Secretary of State. We were showing you that, and we'll finish that out, and then we'll go out to all of the other events that will be happening in and throughout the Capitol today. I'm Daytona Everett here with NewsNOW from Fox. You can give us a follow on Twitter at NewsNOWFox as we post a lot of these events that are happening. So if you miss them, no worries, you can head over there and we've got it all for you. So out to these hearings, and then we'll be hearing from Biden momentarily.
Confirmed presidential appointees may not even attend a political party convention or a convention-related event. Your predecessor stressed that in a cable to State Department employees in December. Quote, "It is important that the department's employees do not improperly engage the Department of State in the political process and that they adhere to the Hatch Act and department policies in their own political activities." Despite that, your predecessor appeared and gave a campaign speech at the Republican National Convention, violating policy that he and the legal advisor had laid clearly down. I want to ask you about the words of another Secretary of State, Colin Powell, who said, "As Secretary of State, I'm obliged not to participate in any way, shape, fashion, or form in parochial political debates. I have to take no sides in the matter." He said in 2004 when he skipped the Republican National Convention. Will you follow the Powell practice that has been the practice of the State Department and the Secretary of State for decades, or will you follow the Pompeo practice and turn the Secretary of State into a partisan political position?
I strongly agree with Secretary Powell, and that is the model I would follow.
I will be extremely disappointed if I see you showing up at partisan events for Democrats, including the president and vice president, the president who's appointed you. If I see you doing campaign events for anybody on my side of the aisle, I will be very disappointed. And I know you're not going to, but I wanted to put that on the record.
And I would welcome you holding me to that. I have to tell you, Senator, I could not agree more strongly that with regard to the State Department, it has to be, and if I have anything to say about it, it will be a nonpartisan institution that is seeking only to advance the national interest. And I might add, I started my career in Washington at the department in 1993. And I've been working with the men and women of the Foreign Service, the Civil Service, for the better part of 25 years. And I could not begin to tell you for 9 out of 10, or maybe even 10 of 10, if the person's a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, or what. They are simply professionals who are working to advance the national interest. And if the person who purports to lead them is not doing the same thing, I think we've got a problem.
Let me ask a related question. The norm over time in the State Department for ambassadors has been that about 70% are career and 30% are political. There's nothing magic about that number, but administrations, both Democratic and Republican, have generally sort of adhered to that ratio. The Trump administration changed that ratio pretty significantly. It was about 55% career and 45% political, 50% higher in terms of the political appointees than the norm. As you have had dialogue with President-elect Biden about his thoughts about the State Department, do you think you'll see us go back to the norm? The political appointees are often very, very important. I get it, and that's why the 30% is important. But do you think we'll go back to a norm and see that 2 to 1 or 70 to 30 as a more likely path forward?
Yes, I do.
Thank you for that. I am very worried. There's been questions about issues in the Western Hemisphere, and I'm worried that we just pay attention to the Western Hemisphere when there's a crisis. If there's a caravan, we're going to be paying attention to it. Significant drug trade from Colombia, we're going to pay attention to it. But then we sort of lose attention, and we tend to look at the world as if it has an east-west axis and not a north-south axis. President-elect Biden, I think, starts with some real goodwill in the region because when he was vice president, he did spend significant time working with our State Department and other professionals to sort of build relations in the Americas. I still think there's just tremendous upside in this. It's hard for a U.S. of 330 million to sort of match up all the time with nations like China with 1 billion people. But the Americas, from Tierra del Fuego to Patagonia, Tierra del Fuego to the Yukon, would have about 1 billion. So the more we can do in tandem with other nations in the Americas, the more we can advance our own economic and security interests. I don't think we should do it just because China and Russia and Iran are getting involved in the region, but that should make us worry. Talk to me a little bit about your big picture perspective and that of the Biden administration on sort of an all America's policy or focus on our own backyard.
Thank you for raising that. You're right. This has actually been an area of focus for the president-elect. I went back and counted not so long ago, and I think he made 16 trips to countries in our hemisphere as vice president. And even before that, when he was a member of this committee, he was very focused on a number of issues in the hemisphere, starting with Colombia, Plan Colombia, and what followed. And then as vice president, a real focus on Mexico, on the Northern Triangle countries, and for that matter, issues throughout the hemisphere. And he has a strongly held view that we have a strong national interest in doing what we can to advance the future for our hemisphere that is democratic, that is middle class, that is secure. And there is a lot that we can and should be doing as partners with countries throughout the hemisphere to advance that vision. So in terms of the way we're resourced, in terms of the way we're focused, I feel confident that this is going to get sustained attention, not what you rightly described as sort of piecemeal
Episodic.
attention. Yeah, episodic.
I look forward to working with you on that. Let me ask you a question about Israel-Palestine, which has come up already. The two-state solution. This has been U.S. policy since Truman, in one way or another, certainly since the Oslo Accords. And yet sometimes I feel like our policy is to say two-state solution is our policy, but it has been hard for us to find meaningful path forward. I paid my first visit to Israel in 1998. I've been to Israel more times than I've been to Ireland, and I have relatives in Ireland. I really value the U.S.-Israel relationship, but the prospects for a peaceful Israel and Palestine existing side by side are worse today than they were in 1998 when I first visited, and I find that tragic.
Yeah.
And what's the challenge of not having a meaningful two-state solution? Let's just talk about COVID. There's a vaccination campaign going on right now that in Israel is viewed as one of the leading and most innovative in the world in terms of vaccinating high percentages of people, but virtually no one in Palestine has been vaccinated. And the Israeli health minister says when we are done with our citizens, then we will focus attention on our neighbors. So the Palestinians are in this odd space where they're sort of they don't have their own country, they're in a country, but they're not considered citizens, they're considered neighbors. This is the kind of thing that suggests we really do need to find a path forward. I do believe the Trump administration's success in the Abrahamic Accords is notable, and I applauded it right out of the gate. How might we use the improved relations between nations in the Arab world with Israel to help advance the prospect, finally, since the late 1940s, the prospect of a two-state solution?
Well, first of all, I very much share the premise of your comment and question, which is, as I see it, the two-state solution, however distant it may appear, is still the best and probably the only way to truly assure Israel's future as a Jewish and democratic state, and of course to give the Palestinians the state to which they are entitled. The challenge, of course, is how to move forward on that at a time when you rightly said, seems more distant than it's ever been, at least since Oslo. I hope that the progress that was made with the Abraham Accords, which I applaud, the steps that countries are taking to normalize relations with Israel is an extremely positive development, and one that we would hope to build on if given the opportunity. I hope that also might create a greater sense of confidence and security in Israel as it considers its relationship with the Palestinians, because whether we like it or not, whether they like it or not, it's not just going away.
And these nations that have now normalized relations can play an important role in both economic support for Palestinians, but also providing security assistance. And they may be more willing to do that now that they've normalized relations in this way. Well, Mr. Blinken, thank you. My time is up. I do want to work with you and State Department on issues about war powers, the cleaning up of the various authorizations from 1991 and 2001 and 2002 that are still floating out in space with no time or geographic limit. I'll look forward to working with the State Department and the White House on those.
I would welcome that.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kaine. Appreciate that. Senator Portman's up next, but I'm told that he is indisposed at the moment, which turns to you, Senator Paul, and we will get back to Senator Portman. Senator Paul.
Thank you. Like Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton, you've been a consistent supporter of military intervention in the Middle East, from the Iraq War to the Libyan War to the Syrian Civil War. Some on your side of the aisle, including the president-elect, have said, well, we were given bad intelligence. They misled us on the intelligence on Iraq. That's a very specific reason. There's probably some truth to it, but I think it misses sort of the lesson of the Iraq War. Likewise, your justification for maybe coming to a new approach on the Libyan civil war is, well, maybe we overestimated the idea of having viable successors there. To me, it seems like we're still missing the point, because even after Libya, you guys went on to Syria wanting to do the same thing again, and you've argued, well, maybe we just didn't do enough. If we'd done more, we could have toppled Assad and we could have had real regime change in Syria. Well, you got it in Iraq, you got it in Libya, and it's a disaster. The lesson of these wars is that regime change doesn't work. People say, oh, we're going to get rid of the iron fist, and Thomas Jefferson's going to arise from the ashes. Well, that is a naive notion to believe that Thomas Jefferson or his like live in Libya or live in Iraq. Their tradition is so much different than ours. I mean, we've been fighting against centralized power in the English tradition for 1,000 years. The revolution in England was 350 years ago. Ours was 250 years ago. That tradition they don't have. They have a tribal existence. You trade one for another. But mostly what you've gotten through the policies you have advocated, and Joe Biden has advocated, and frankly, John Bolton has advocated, this idea of regime change has been a disaster for the Middle East. We complain, everybody around here is concerned, Iran, Iran, Iran. Well, why is Iran stronger? Who's their best friend in the region now? Iraq. We did that. We had a balance of power. It wasn't perfect, but we had somewhat of a balance of power in the Middle East, and you guys messed it up. You got rid of the one bad guy, and another bad guy got stronger. And so then you went to Libya and did the same thing. And they said, well, maybe Libya's a one-off. Well, maybe there's a rule here. Maybe there's something we can learn about regime change, and maybe we can learn that humility would be that maybe we shouldn't be choosing every government in the Middle East. I would argue that instead of always choosing the governments, maybe we should not reward the bad ones. You know what I mean? So, for example, with Saudi Arabia, I despise the regime. I'd probably still trade with them. I probably wouldn't cut them off completely. I wouldn't sell many more arms. And after they killed Khashoggi, they shouldn't have got one bit of our armaments. But both sides advocate for this. On UAE, we tried to stop that because UAE has a terrible human rights record. Both sides support it. The problem around here is we have bipartisan consensus. The problem isn't lack of consensus. The problem is too much consensus, but the consensus is for regime change. Are any of the lessons you've learned from the failure of Iraq war, Libyan war, the chaos, the vacuum, and more terrorism that occurred and more lives that were lost, and then to go on to Syria? I don't get that there's been a lesson learned. Is there any kind of lesson learned on your part that regime change may not be the best thing for us in the Middle East?
Senator, I think we and I certainly have an absolute obligation to try to learn from everything we've done, advocated, to take into account the results, and to make that inform how we think about these problems going forward. And I've done a lot of hard thinking about some of the very situations you mentioned. I'm proud of the fact that I have spent all of my career during the times I've been in government for the better part of 25 years, working to advance our diplomacy, to do everything we possibly can to make sure that diplomacy is the first answer, not the last answer, and that war and conflict is a last resort.
The next step was Syria. The next step was the Syrian civil war, which looks a lot like the Iraq war and the Libyan war.
In Syria, there were those who were advocating for a repeat of Iraq, which is to say a whole-scale intervention. That's something that I did not agree with. When we were looking at what to do in Afghanistan.
But here's the problem in Syria. There was a predictable result there. Had you gotten rid of Assad, who were the fiercest fighters over there? Al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda. The more radical you were, the better fighters you were. The program that you started with Hillary Clinton, the program to train the moderate rebels, we spent $250 million. We trained about 60. We sent 10 of them into battle, and they were captured in the first 10 minutes. It was a complete disaster. This whole idea that there were moderates over there that we were going to support, doctors and lawyers and stuff, there were, but I don't think they were out there fighting. The ones out there fighting were jihadists, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and if they'd have taken over the country, Assad's a terrible person, but I'm not positive that these people would have been better. So, I mean, it's the same lesson. Our humility has to be, let's quit toppling regimes over there. Let's don't support the bad ones, but let's don't presume enough that if we topple them, that in the vacuum, Thomas Jefferson is going to arise, because it never seems to happen. With regard to advise and consent, and this is a little bit on Senator Barrasso's extension of his question on treaties, it really isn't so much a solicitous mood to say, well, we just can't pass these treaties, so we're going to make all these agreements, they're not coming to you. But I would argue even more importantly on war. You have argued when you've been part of administrations that, oh yes, we'd like Senator Kane's, a more narrow AUMF, but we don't really need it. Now, you're not alone. That sort of, I think, arrogant executive sort of attitude comes from both parties. Every president for the last 50 years. In fact, they all probably believe this. They believe they have absolute power. It's called this absolute Article 2 authority. And this runs on both sides. But it runs through the extremes on our side. The John Boltons on our side believe in this absolute Article 2 authority. The AUMF from 9/11 had nothing to do with people in Somalia. Do you think the AUMF from 9/11 authorizes you to continue the war in Somalia?
I think the AUMF from 9/11 has been used in countries and against groups that were not contemplated or cited in the AUMF, which is the very strong reason why we should revisit it.
But it's very specific. It says people who organized to attack us. It doesn't mention, people say, well, they say and associated forces. That's not in it. That's somebody dreamed that up later and sort of said that it's in. It's not in there. It doesn't say associated forces. There is no authorization for war in Somalia, Mali, Yemen, which the Obama administration originally did support. So there really isn't. And I'm not for a more narrow one. I'm just for no more war over there. I'm tired of all the war. I'm tired of all the nation building. Look, I love the rights of women as much as anybody, but if our goal is going to be that we're going to keep women in power, like in Saudi Arabia, we're going to go to war with Saudi Arabia because they don't have women ministers of health and stuff. It really isn't exactly our national security that you're talking about. You're talking about something different. Now, from the point of view of the Secretary of State, there are things you can do through soft power to advocate for the principles we believe in. But overthrowing governments to instill women's rights or to continue women's rights and to continue a military presence there and fight battles for it is really not something that is in the purview of the Secretary of State or really under the Constitution to anyone in our government. With regard to NATO, you've advocated for expanding NATO. Do you still support putting Georgia in NATO?
If a country like Georgia is able to meet the requirements of membership and if it can contribute to our collective security, yes, the door should remain open.
So if you're successful, then we would be at war with Russia now.
I actually think just the opposite. I think that, Senator, with regard to NATO membership, there's a very good reason that Russia has proved aggressive against countries that are not actually in NATO and under the umbrella, and a good reason why it's chosen not to attack.
This would be adding Georgia that's occupied to NATO under Article 5, then we would go to war.
Well, I think we've seen, again, in the past that countries that have joined NATO have not been the same target of Russian aggression that we've seen.
We were talking about 20 years ago, we might have a valid argument now. Russia occupies Georgia. Russia occupies, or proxy troops occupy part of Ukraine. So I think adding either of them to NATO not only is provocative, but you'd have to think what comes next. I mean, if we're obligated to defend our NATO allies, I mean, basically we'd be voting for war. So I wouldn't vote to add Georgia to NATO, not on your life, unless I'm ready to send my kids and your kids to go fight in Georgia. The complicated fights and wars and occupation around, and I just think that we need to think these things through. And I think for every provocation, there's a response as well. So we can't look at it in a vacuum. People say, I don't care what Russia thinks, or I don't care what Tehran thinks. Well, if we don't understand our adversaries enough to think how they will respond, then I don't think we're doing our job.
I agree with you.
But as you can tell, I'm not excited about more military intervention in the Middle East. I think there has been some chastening on the part of the incoming administration over previous failures. But I don't think you have completely gotten the idea that regime change has been a terrible disaster. It's created vacuums, chaos, and actually more terrorism throughout the region. So I hope you will consider that. It's important, not just for the philosophic point, but it's important for our kids. I mean, we're sending these kids over to fight in these wars that go on forever and ever and ever, and somebody's got to stand up. And I hope you will be somebody brave enough to stand up and stop some of this.
I appreciate what you said.
Thank you, Senator Paul. Next up is Senator Markey, who I'm told is joining us electronically. Senator Markey, are you with us?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
I can hear you, Senator Markey. I can't see you, but your voice is well heard here.
Okay, thank you. Much appreciated. Let me ask this question. Aside from rejoining the WHO, which President-elect Biden has already committed to doing, what will the Biden administration do to ensure that the vaccine is disseminated quickly and fairly so that every country has a chance to protect their citizens regardless of their wealth?
Thank you, Senator. The President-elect has said that we are committed to making sure that, to the best of our ability, the vaccine is distributed properly and equitably. We intend to join COVAX. We believe strongly that we can do that, ensure that every American gets the vaccine, but also help make sure that others around the world who want it have access to it. The WHO is a very imperfect organization in need of reform, but one of the reasons that the President-elect has determined we should get back into the WHO is that we're going to be in a much more effective position to advance that reform of the WHO if we're there at the table than if we're outside the organization. So I think the combination of rejoining, taking part in COVAX, and then looking at how we can help make sure that the vaccine is equitably distributed is something that we're going to take on. I would say that, in addition to that, we're seeing now the potential for a lot of COVID tails to wag the COVID dog around the world in ways that will come back potentially to hurt us. We're seeing the potential for a debt crisis among emerging economies and developing economies. We're seeing public health crises in country after country because COVID has made it more difficult to provide other health services. And we're seeing state fragility increase, not decrease, as a result of many of the challenges that COVID has exacerbated or in some cases led to. So we have a national interest in helping and in doing our part to make sure that as the vaccine becomes available, we help get it out there as quickly and as effectively as we can.
So is the Biden administration committed to seek additional funding for the Global Fund and other programs meant to respond to the massive public health needs related to COVID-19?
In short, yes. One of the things, though, that I should say is that Congress has done a very good service, I think, in providing the funding that's already on the table in terms of COVAX and that initiative. But I think that additional resources are likely to be needed.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to North Korea, if we could, in moving forward towards the goal of ultimately denuclearizing, would you support an attempt to achieve a phased agreement that offers tailored sanctions relief to North Korea in exchange for a verifiable freeze or other restrictions on North Korea's WMD programs?
I think we have, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's the question.
I think we have to review, and we intend to review, the entire approach and policy toward North Korea, because this is a hard problem that has plagued administration after administration, and it's a problem that has not gotten better. In fact, it's gotten worse. But I begin by acknowledging the fact that it was a hard problem to begin with. So I think one of the first things we would do, and we would welcome being able to consult on that, is to review the entire approach, look at what options we have and that can be effective in terms of increasing pressure on North Korea to come to the negotiating table, as well as what other diplomatic initiatives may be possible. But that starts with consulting closely with our allies and partners, particularly with South Korea and with Japan and others, and reviewing all of the bidding. And so we'll start there, and we'd welcome a conversation on that.
Okay, and if I can just follow up, and I agree with you, we have to increase enforcement so that China and Russia abide by the sanctions meant to target the regime. But we also have to ensure that we don't inadvertently harm the North Korean people, particularly as they suffer from famine and the effects of a complete lockdown of their borders due to the pandemic. When North Korea reopens its borders, will you support easing some of the restrictions to allow legitimate humanitarian assistance to reach the North Korean people?
I think in North Korea and in other similarly situated places, we have to have an eye clearly on the people of the country in question and on doing what we can to alleviate their suffering. And even if we have a strong grievance with the regime, or with the government, and that we're taking action to do something about that. We, to the best of our ability, try to do so in a way that, in the first instance, isn't harmful to the people of the country. And so we'll take a hard look at that. In the past, as previous administrations have engaged the North Korean nuclear challenge, they've found ways to make sure that humanitarian assistance, medical assistance, et cetera, could, in fits and starts, get to the North Korean people. So we do want to make sure that in anything we do, we have an eye on the humanitarian side of the equation, not just on the security side of the equation.
No, thank you so much. You know, and we've heard a lot today about the JCPOA in Iran. The bottom line is that the single greatest existential threat in the region is a nuclear Iran, and we must take that off the table before we look to making the agreement longer and stronger. As you say, would you commit to re-entering the JCPOA without any preconditions as a starting point, so long as the Iranians return to all of their commitments as well?
What the president-elect has said on that, Senator, is that if Iran returns to compliance with the JCPOA, we would do the same thing and then use that as a platform, working with our allies and partners to build a longer and stronger agreement to also capture some of the other issues that need to be dealt with regard to missiles, with regard to Iran's activities and destabilizing activities in the region. Having said that, I think we're some ways from even that. There is a lot that Iran would need to do to come back into compliance. We would then have to evaluate whether it had actually done so. So I don't think that's anything that's happening tomorrow or the next day.
Okay, thank you. Saudi Crown Prince bin Salman's declaration that the kingdom may illegally seek a nuclear bomb makes the task of returning Iran to compliance with the JCPOA all the more urgent. Will you press the Saudis to come clean about their reported ballistic missile cooperation with China and insist that they adopt the additional protocol which would give the IAEA the same type of access it has in Iran?
We want to make sure that, to the best of our ability, all of our partners and allies are living up to their obligations under various non-proliferation and arms control agreements. And certainly in the case of Saudi Arabia, that's something we'll want to look at.
Thank you. And on the New START agreement, is the administration going to extend it by a full 5 years?
So we had an opportunity to talk about this just a little bit earlier. What the president-elect has said is that very cognizant of the fact that we have one president at a time and that we couldn't really engage on this issue during the transition. We have the challenge because, as you know, the deadline to act or not on an extension comes upon us very, very quickly. We've got just a couple of weeks to do that. So I think this is something that we will be coming to you on pretty much immediately after the president is about what duration we would seek.
Thank you. I think it's very important. I'm looking forward to working with you on that. I just think that's an incredibly important historic moment. And as you know, the Trump administration rolled back much of the United States' previous efforts to support and promote LGBTI rights around the world. And I'm thrilled that you and President-elect Biden have indicated that you're going to support and appoint a new special envoy for human rights on LGBTI people, a position that I've been pushing to make permanent through my International Human Rights Defense Act, but which was left vacant in the Trump years. After 4 years of Trump administration efforts to specifically marginalize, minimize, do damage to the rights of the LGBTI people, I think it's going to be vital to appoint a seasoned expert on those issues. Are you going to move forward towards a speedy appointment towards an LGBTI envoy, and would you consider raising it to ambassadorial level?
Both questions is yes, absolutely. This is a matter, I think, of some real urgency. We've seen violence directed against LGBTIQ people around the world increase. We've seen, I believe, the highest number of murders of transgender people, particularly women of color, that we've seen ever. And so I think the United States playing the role that it should be playing in standing up for and defending the rights of LGBTQI people is something that the department is going to take on immediately.
Thank you. And will you repudiate the findings of the report of the Commission on Unalienable Rights and reaffirm the United States acceptance and adherence to the human rights laid out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? And will you ensure that ambassadors are able to fly the pride flag at our embassies once again around the world?
Yes to both.
Beautiful. Thank you. And one final question on Rohingya. If confirmed, will you commit to overseeing an interagency process to make a determination as to whether the crimes committed against the Rohingya in Burma constitute genocide?
Yes, I would.
Thank you. And by the way, thank you for all of your work on climate change. I think it's just a huge historical change of direction, and congratulations on having John Kerry be named as your partner on those issues. How quickly is the department going to be able to move in order to make sure that we have made climate change a top issue, and that would put climate justice at the center of what we're advocating for globally?
Given Secretary Kerry's leadership, I suspect immediately.
Excellent. And climate justice?
As well. This is something we'll very much factor into what we're doing around the world.
Thank you, Senator
so
Markey.
much. Thank you. Looking forward to working with you, Mr. Secretary.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Markey. And I'm told now that Senator Portman has extricated himself from whatever was more important than this hearing. And so I'm going to recognize him at the present time. Senator Portman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm with you. Nothing could be more important than the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and I have been watching the hearing throughout the afternoon. And Mr. Blinken, I also appreciate the time you spent with me on the phone talking about your plans for the department and how you would change some of the positions of the previous administration, but also build on some of those. And I would just say, in listening today, it seems to me there are opportunities for us to build on some of the successes. I think about the Abraham Accords. I think about much of our policy toward Russia as an example, being able to provide, as we did this year at a record level, lethal weapons for self-defense in Ukraine. I think about what we've done in Belarus to try to promote democracy. I think about standing up to China. And I think that from what I've heard today, that you'd be interested in engaging on that issue even more, particularly as it relates to human rights and the Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities. And generally speaking, how to deal with Iran. We're going to have some differences of opinion, it sounds like, but I think you are fairly clear-eyed on what the challenges are with regard to Iran and not being trusting of them and the way they're headed. Today, Mr. Chairman, and to Ranking Member Menendez, there are 5 hearings going on. I've been in 3 of them, sharing one of them. And I think that's great. I think it's good that we're moving quickly with some of the key appointments, including Secretary of State, but also Secretary of Defense, Homeland Security Director, DNI, Treasury, all important roles. And I hope we can get these nominations to the floor for a vote. And then we'll, let the chips fall where they may. But I'm actually supportive of us moving quickly. And Mr. Chairman, I know this happened because you were willing to do it in this interim period. As we discussed last week, Mr. Blinken, I've got lots of interest in this issue of disinformation and propaganda and how we push back against it. I think it's kind of the new warfare of the 21st century. Not that we don't have kinetic battle still, but a lot of this is happening online and through disinformation. The Global Engagement Center was established at the State Department to deal with this. Senator Murphy spoke earlier, and he and I have worked closely over 4 years now to try to strengthen the GEC, the Global Engagement Center, and give it the ability to push back disinformation operations by our adversaries. Are inexpensive. There's a lot of deniability associated with it. It's easy for them to do. And when you combine it with economic and political subversion, it can be devastating to some of the nascent democracies we're trying to help. So thanks to the work of the Global Engagement Center, I think we now have the beginnings of an effective organization to deal with that. And again, I hope that's something that you'd be willing to build on. Could you speak to that briefly and also talk about your commitment to the funding level? We've We're able to get 60 million bucks in this year. That's half of what we wanted, less than half of what we wanted. But compare that to China, which, according to a hearing that Senator Booker and I had on combating disinformation recently, China spends over $10 billion a year in state-sponsored disinformation operations. I wonder if you could comment on the Global Engagement Center and the challenge we face.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I could not agree more with your comments and with the work that you've done on this. This is the perhaps a primary battlefield that we have to fight on. And even as we manage to deter aggression and kinetic action by adversaries, every single day we are experiencing aggression of one kind or another in the misinformation and disinformation realm. And we need to engage that, and we need to engage that effectively. And indeed, you're right. That is why the GEC was formed. I'll tell you, I had the experience in the early days of the Ukraine conflict and Russia's aggression there in dealing with Russia using weaponizing information in increasingly effective ways. And of course, little did we know what would come after that. But you'll recall the downing of the Malaysian airliner, and Russia was extraordinarily effective in mixing up and muddying the waters, using misinformation and disinformation as to their culpability and responsibility. And out of some of these experiences, there's been an effort at the State Department to give ourselves the tools and the resources to engage in this fight. And the Global Engagement Center is exactly that. So I'm determined to make sure that if I'm confirmed, that it is resourced adequately and appropriately. As well, I think we need to make sure that we're bringing in the talent, the expertise to be able to use it effectively, because these are specialized skills that in some cases many of us don't have. And to make sure that we have continuity, because this is an ongoing battle every single day, we have conveyed the message that we would welcome the current leader of the GEC to stay on, to make sure that we don't have any drop balls in the weeks and months ahead.
Well, I thank you. Leah Gabriel has done a good job.
All right, folks, we are now switching gears out live right now in Washington, D.C. You see President-elect there, Joe Biden, where he will be doing a COVID-19 memorial just a day before the inauguration there, and we will take this live in full for you right here on News Now from Fox.